Hello, welcome back to Math Time with Professor Prime. I am your host, as always, Professor Prime. So, let's talk about math and comics. Four shared universes, multiverses, and omniverses. Um, and yeah, so I've made several math and comics videos because here's the thing: comics, there's a lot to talk about with them, and the same can be said about math and the math that's in them. And in this video, I'm going to talk about like how like math is used in comics in general, and I'm going to be like talking about that mostly in the context of the topics that I mentioned before. So let's start with a shared universe. And okay, so let's take we can talk about the big two, of course, because like I mean, there's just so much stuff to pull from there. But let's talk about the big two, Marvel and DC. So for DC, you have Batman and Superman, Wonder Woman, Flash, Green Lantern, and all of them, and they all have their own separate journeys, right? Like for Batman, Batman's going on his adventures. He might be working with Robin. He might be doing his own thing, but he has his own Batman universe, so to speak, but universe in the context of just like he has his realm where Batman action happens, and he has characters that come from his universe that might have spun off and have their own solo series like Nightwing, but they all come from the Batman universe, and then within the Batman universe there are sort of like a shared universe with other Batman characters, and again, the universe in that kind of realm talk, and then you have all those characters interacting with the DC universe as a whole. Like, right? Because Superman is going on with his journeys, but he shares that universe with Batman. Same with Wonder Woman. Same with Flash and the Flash family and the Green Lantern Corps and all the other cores that are now part of the Green Lantern mythos because they just have all the colors now. But the whole thing is, you have these shared universes, and there's math and how all of these work and function, how the stories are told, how the characters interact with each other. Because when I think about comics, right, like it's sequential art, right, and that right there, that other name for comics, that for me lets me know that math is just baked into this medium, like right, because there's a lot of math and how you tell a story in general, but there's especially to me a lot of math in comics that you can see a little bit more visibly if you're looking careful enough, right? Because you're telling like just still a single issue. You're telling a story over an issue, for instance. That issue has a certain number of pages, and that those pages have a certain number of panels, and so you're telling your story over the course of that comic, and you're dealing with words and images, and there's a lot of math and how they play with one another, and how you deal with things space wise, how you deal with things proportionally. There's a lot of math in the ink, there's a lot of math in the color, there's a lot of math in all of it. And so when you're dealing with these characters in their own stories, there's a lot of math logistically and how they work and how they flow and how they're drawn and how their worlds are drawn. And so if you have like another character in this shared universe and there's like a crossover, for instance, you have to kind of balance things out. You might have to change your art style a bit. You might have to change how the story may flow because there might be a tone difference between characters in the same universe, right? You're probably going to get a lighter story in a Superman or a Flash comic as opposed to a Batman comic, and so you kind of have to adjust accordingly and try to make the characters line up. And there is a certain math to that. Now, whether people do it well or not, that's a different story. But it doesn't change the fact that the math is there, right? Like there's a certain formula you may want to follow to get the best results. And again, whether it's followed or not, that's a different story. Um, so anyway, so you have the shared universe, and already there's a lot going on logistically, and there's a lot of math and having these characters interact with each other. But then you have the multiverse, and that's a whole larger thing because, like, if you want to really get into it, you do have like the continuities of the main verses, between DC and Marvel and all that good stuff. But you might want to think about what continuity really means. It gets tricky when you're talking about continuity in canon because like reboots happen and retcons happen and all of that crazy stuff. But when you think multiverses, people often like try to separate them out. Um, and there's reasons for that, but what I think about is like, hey, these worlds all satisfy that idea that they're a part of this not only shared universe, but they're a part of a multiverse. And a lot of times in like Marvel and DC, for instance, these multiverses are numbered. They have certain indications that come with that. With Marvel, it feels a little bit more random, but like in DC, it's like the one that you're focusing on tends to be the like Earth One or Earth Prime or whatever you want to do. And there's fluctuations with that, but that's the general idea. Probably oversimplifying it, but the idea is they're using numbers to designate different types of worlds, and there's implications that come with those worlds. And interestingly enough, it's like Earth is always like the center of that because it's like it's never Universe One or Universe Two. It's like Earth One, Earth Two. And with like Marvel, that was for DC. Marvel was like, oh, it's Earth 616 or that sort of thing, and instead of just the Universe 616 for the most part. And the reason for that. But my whole point is numbers are used to designate certain worlds, and there are implications that come with those numbers and that come with those worlds. And so you see math in action there too. And then I talked a little bit about shared universe with like DC, but like, Marvel has the same thing, and it's pretty cool too. Like they have the characters going on separate adventures, which can often feel totally different from other storylines, but things are happening. Like Spider-Man has his own stories, Fantastic Four have theirs. Same with the X-Men, and a lot of the X-Men have had solo series over the years, so they've had their own thing. So there's like shared universe and all of these, right? There's a better way to say that. And I guess in general, when I'm talking about shared universe, it's like, hey, let's say that you have Earth One for like a DC character, for instance, and you're gonna have certain characters on Earth One have certain offshoots and adventures of their own, but they all share that Earth One connection. And the same with Marvel, like say the main one, like Earth 616, Earth 616. You have characters doing all these different things on that Earth. But there's other Earths too, and that's when you get into multiverse territory. But anyway, I think it's all interesting, and then you get into the option. The idea of the Omniverse, and I think that's where things get tricky because there is a lot of math and all these things, and a lot of interesting ideas and all of them. But the Omniverse sort of annoys me because it tries to tie together, like not just like say if you're like Marvel or DC, and you say there's such thing as an Omniverse, then you're saying everything that's like fictional kind of belongs to your universe, and there's a lot of math in how you want to say that, but it's limiting from a storytelling perspective to me because like you can't control the other licenses and all that, but it's just kind of you're trying to stake your claim, so to speak. But I think like DC had been doing some recent stuff with that. And there's math and what they can do in a story with it, but again, like I think it's fairly limiting and kind of silly when people start saying that and annoying. But I think like another interesting thing that they do or have done, I know with like DC, like I think that's way better than the Omniverse idea is just like making all of their continuities count, in whatever weird way that they've been doing that. So I think that's interesting. But I digress. My whole thing is just like when you're dealing with all these different characters, there's a lot of math that goes into telling the stories. There's a lot of math that goes into drawing the characters, and there's a lot of math that goes into the tone that you're trying to convey and how that's conveyed through your art and your words. And when you're dealing with characters in a shared universe or a multiverse, how you depict those things involves a lot of math. And from an editorial standpoint, there's a lot of like a lot of money to be made in these characters and what you can do with them, and that affects how storytelling is told. That affects how things are drawn. There's a lot of math and all that too, and I think that's interesting. Like comics are insane. There's just so much you could do and say, and then there's so much you could talk about them, or sorry, so much that you could talk about as far as they're concerned. And honestly, the same can be said for math, and I think it's all interesting. That being said, I will see you in the next one. Professor Prime out.